Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is WorkTripp introducing, and each week we are going to hop onto these live broadcasts to talk to some of our favourite people in the WorkTripp community. For those of you who don't know what we do, where have you been? So we have a marketplace and we have tools and services that basically help leaders to get their team together and create really high impact offsites. So we showcase amazing out of town venues in nature, brilliant coaches and facilitators and speakers, and really memorable team experiences to make your next offsite super amazing. I am very lucky to be joined by one of my favorites here, who is Elina Teboul, who is an executive and leadership coach. We work with her, Sophie and I. She's our coach, and we think she's absolutely amazing. So I'm so delighted that she's the first guest on our WorkTripp introducing. Welcome, Elina.
Thank you so much. And guys are obviously my favorite clients. Love working with you and Sophie.
She says that to all the girls. It's mad.
But Sally, you and I go way back from your previous career. So it's been really such an honor to work with you for so long and really love being part of this WorkTripp journey.
Oh, thank you. And so I always like to ask people to introduce themselves the way that they like to be introduced, so I don't stumble through reading things or get it all wrong. So Elina, how do you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I never figured this out. I'm still kind of like, what am I going to be when I grow up? But these days, I usually say that I'm a leadership coach. And so what does leadership really mean to me? So first, I think it's autobiographical. So I really work with people one-on-one for them to figure out who they are authentically. This is really important for me to understand their values and their strengths and really that one-on-one deep down dive into who you are. And then I work with teams, obviously, taking them to beautiful outdoor venues with WorkTripp. And so my purpose is really to get people to be authentically aligned with who they are, to have that emotional intelligence, but also that relational and social intelligence to be part of a team that is high performing, but also purpose driven and happy working together.
Yeah, and you have a super interesting background. I'd love it if you just give us a bit of a sort of highlights reel of the areas that you've been working in.
Yeah, so I am a recovering corporate lawyer. So once upon a time, I thought I was really important. I had like a briefcase with a lot of printed out documents.
Shout out to briefcases. Love that.
Yeah, I was doing investment management law in New York for a big firm, which was really great training, I think. I mean, those kinds of, the big banks, the big law firms, they really, I think, teach you how to be an adult. But it made me question a lot of things about what is the purpose of work, because I saw that people were coming to the office every day not being authentic and aligned and congruent, and they didn't find purpose and meaning in what they were doing. And I really didn't understand. I was really young, and I went to law school thinking, the law was this noble profession that really could have very meaningful and important changes for our societies. And I understood that I wasn't really doing that as a corporate lawyer. So I left and I went to work for a foundation, the Alan and Jill Gray Foundation, which was started by a man, Alan Gray, who's now passed away a few years ago, but an absolutely phenomenal foundation focused on social entrepreneurship. And so they created basically an accelerator in South Africa, which sponsors young social entrepreneurs and really does everything. I mean, from sponsoring their education to the full accelerator with all of the mentorship and access and connections that entails. And really the purpose of the foundation was to transform South Africa, because was at the time when Alan created it, still a very poor country, recovering from apartheid, and with not a lot of equality in opportunity, obviously. And what he really understood was that entrepreneurship creates change, that philanthropy where you just dump a bunch of money in, that doesn't really work. We know that doesn't really work, but we know that entrepreneurship and the drive and the passion of young entrepreneurs has the potential to transform entire countries and employ people and create economic growth. So I was really passionate for working for the foundation, and that's what got me interested in leadership, because we were trying to, explain to the entrepreneurs what purposeful, conscious leadership really was. I always say Alan Gray was like the initial conscious capitalist, because he was talking about this stuff in the 70s when it wasn't popular the way that it is today. And so that inspired me to study leadership. So I went back to school and did my master's in psychology, and became an executive coach. So it's been an interesting journey to get here, but I say I've seen what doesn't work and I've seen what works, which is really helpful today working with clients to really be able to, I think, understand where they're at.
That's super interesting. I always love hearing all of your stories from that time. I think it's absolutely fascinating. And quite a lot of the work that you're doing at the moment focuses on women in leadership positions. Tell me a little bit about that, the sort of why and what gets you really excited about working with women.
Yeah, so I started a few years ago with an organization that I'm sure some of your listeners are familiar with, called Chief. So Chief started in the US with two female founders. And within 2 years, they were a unicorn. So I think that they were like one of the fastest female-led unicorns like ever, because it literally took them 2 years in the middle of the pandemic. But they created the first kind of networking platform for senior executive women. And their mission is to change the face of leadership. And the heart of Chief is really these core groups. So a core group is 8 to 10 executive women, and they meet with a coach, with a facilitator who's called their guide, which is the part that I do. I'm their guide. And they go really deep. So we meet once a month, and it becomes this brain trust, like your board of directors, where you're not just working one-on-one with a coach, but the coach is helping to facilitate all of the collective knowledge. And you can really understand what people in different industries do, the challenges that women are facing. And so it's really interesting because it's a group of women. It's not a team. They don't work together. They don't work for the same organization. But we sort of find out that the basic human needs, right? Like we all have the same ones. And that intelligence and that experience that women are able to share with each other when you, as a coach, sort of guide them through the frameworks and the exercises, but the intelligence, I think, really comes from them. So my passion really grew out of running a whole bunch of those groups. And this is really timely because a group that I was running for 2 years just ended yesterday. And we all were like about to cry, I have to say. I was like, big shout out to my core group, the one that ended yesterday, because all of them got promotions, changed careers, like personal stuff has happened. They've started businesses. Like we were a real family. And it was just so meaningful and so profound. And I was asking them yesterday, like, what are you taking out of this? And they're like, we all of a sudden know how to listen. Like we know how to ask the right questions. We know how to not problem solve because we listen to each other. We know that like we care about like our purpose and we understand what it means to be an authentic female leader. Like that's not just a buzzword anymore. Like I know what that means for me, which in today's society, we have so many buzzwords, we don't actually know what they mean. So imagine you can actually, for yourself, know what it means for you to be your authentic self, like your authentic leader. So it's so beautiful and so powerful. And I run a bunch of these kinds of groups. And there's another organization that I'm working with called the Beam Network, which is kind of similar for high net worth women, and also bringing them together in this kind of peer advisory community. And I'm really passionate about just what happens when we get women in a room together. I think that kind of a few generations ago, when it was the first women who were the ones who are making it in our business worlds, there was this competition. It felt like maybe there's only space for one because there was. right? And thank God this is changing. And I mean, there was always like that rumor that the worst boss to work for is like a woman because like she's been through it and she fought so hard. And so like she thinks you should be fighting so hard too. And that's not our like authentic truth. That was the patriarchy and the way that society was framed at that time that created that. And I'm so happy to kind of know that the truth is that we are collaborative and that we are supportive and that there isn't competition when you create the right structures and the right culture within, you know, your own organization or within any group.
I absolutely agree. That's totally been my experience. Sophie and I are a part of Female Founders Rise, and even though we're lucky enough to have each other, and there are lots of people who are solo female founders, still being part of that community and having the conversations, and as you say, realizing it's the same sort of needs and challenges, but being able to share the stories with each other, it makes a massive difference.
Yeah.
Lovely. And so, I mean, as you alluded to there, I think you can create obviously really sort of strong bonds in these kind of core groups that you've been talking about, which are all virtual, right? So what's the role of in-person meeting, do you think, today?
You know, it's funny, right? Because as organizations scale, you kind of like you have to go virtual if you're trying to create that like once a month consistent. You have people in different places. So I do understand that there's a lot of benefit to the virtual, but everybody always says, like, can we meet in person? How do we organize for this to be able to happen in person?
Yeah.
And sometimes when they do then meet in person, like these virtual groups, and they're like, oh my God, I actually, even though we've had all these conversations, like you're so much taller than I expected, or you're so like your energy is different in real life than it is on the Zoom, right? And you're more present because you can't, like right now you could still check your email and you can look at your phone and somebody could walk in, but when you're really there together in person and that energetic human thing is happening and you're fully present, like it's just different, right? Like we know it's different. And so forever I'm always going to be a proponent of as much as possible to get together in person, preferably obviously in nature. All the research tells you that. But I do think it's different. And I know that the people who, out of any of these virtual groups that I run, the people who make the time to meet in person, even if they go for a coffee separately out of the group, they have a different kind of relationship. Like the groups that I run that are all London based, where we've had opportunities to meet in person, they feel fundamentally different than a group where everybody's in a different location and they never like had a chance to be in person together. So I think, you know, I always love the hybrid model. There is in person to set like the real foundations of trust and belonging and connection. And then you can follow that up, right? You can follow that up with all of the virtual meetings that practically fit into our working lives.
Yeah.
And so I always think, right, it's like the genius of the and.
Exactly. We talk about that. How do you modulate between being apart and being together and offline and online, and use each of those to sort of supercharge the other? It's that's the goal, the dream.
Dream.
So talk to me a little bit about being in nature and your relationship with that, and what you think that does for the kind of groups or individuals that you work with.
Yeah, it's interesting time for me to be talking about this now. So Sally knows that I'm extremely passionate about the current research into psychedelic assisted therapies. And this is something that I'm kind of delving into very deeply on an academic front. I'm being trained as a psychedelic therapist at the California Integral Institute, and really kind of exploring what is the impact of these medicines on leadership. So I think that these medicines are not just there to fix disease. Right now, we have a very medicalized conversation happening. For me, I think that this is a way to tap into our purpose, into our collective, into our consciousness. And I'm really passionate about these substances. And one really interesting thing is that psychedelics, there's a wealth of research about how psychedelics connect us back to the environment and how they connect us back to nature. Funny enough, I have a LinkedIn newsletter, and this month's newsletter that'll come out in a couple of days is all about this. And the reason for that is because I had a psychedelic experience about a week ago with psilocybin, which is the active ingredient in magic mushrooms. And I did it in nature. And it was all about Mother Earth. It was all about us being in belonging in our environment, feeling her breathing, feeling her protecting us, feeling her rage and her pain about when we're not taking care of her. And I cried a lot, so I kind of want to cry when I think about it, because it's who we are. Like, as human beings, we belong in nature. We have had this really interesting personal construct with nature, which we think of it as other. We think there's human and then there's nature. And the majority of our time on this planet, we have been trying to protect ourselves from nature. We are creating, the roofs above our heads so that the winds and the storms and the fires, so that we're protected and we're set apart. And what that has done is we've created legal structures which, make us own Mother Earth. So I think this is really interesting. As a lawyer, I'm kind of like a nerd when it comes to the law, but we actually think that we own the earth. I think this is kind of ridiculous. I work with an organization called the Earth Law Center, and the Earth Law Center tries to actually fight in court to give the earth's legal standing, so that a river actually has rights and we can't just pollute it.
How interesting.
Trying to get the earth like an actual seat at the UN. I wrote recently about Faith in Nature, which is a UK startup, which has now been able to put a representative of the earth on their board, represented by the Earth Law Center.
So I heard about this the other day. That's so interesting.
So it's our relationship with how we think we, human versus the earth, and that we could just own the earth, and that in our economic models we just put that under like externalities, right? Like in our profit and loss statements, like we're not really focused on it. And so this is all really important, to be part of nature, to remind ourselves that like this construct we've created where it's us against nature is not true. And this is actually a cause of a lot of mental health problems. And there's a lot of research on this, that we need to know that we are part of nature. We are nature. When we talk about protecting nature, it's about protecting ourselves as a species. Because, by the way, like when Mother Earth just has enough of us, like we'll be gone. She'll still be here. Hopefully. But when we talk about like bringing ourselves out of our boardroom into nature and having these offsites be in nature, this is so just fundamental to our humanity, to remind ourselves to be in that atmosphere, surrounded by what makes us thrive, what protects us, what supports us. And of course, this is when all the research shows that this is when we're most creative and we're most connected and our blood pressure is down, because we are literally in the environment that is most suited to our history and our biology. Yeah. And so honestly, this is just like a fact of life. And like we cannot argue that doing work in nature is anything less than our ability to be our optimal selves. Yeah.
I love what you said there about these sort of constructs that we have, because I think that a lot of people will think about their sort of business and commercial activities very separately from maybe their individual connection to their environment and nature. And sort of drawing the lines between the two, I think, is a bit uncomfortable for some people.
Yeah. And I mean, but that's what coaching is, right? Coaching is zooming out and having a different perspective. So and really, this is how I see coaching, that, you work in your business, you're there day to day, you're fully engrossed in the kind of problems, the challenges, the opportunities, and very often you don't have an opportunity to see it in a completely different way, from a completely different perspective. And I think that's really what coaching does. And I have to say, the coaching kind of education people say you're not supposed to have an agenda. I'm a coach that like has an agenda. Be in nature, because when you're in nature and you're connected to nature, you want to save nature because you realize its benefits. And so if you want to be kind of an eco-conscious coach, just putting people in the environment where they can, it's not just an intellectual exercise, it's an embodied experience, and you feel good and you say, oh my God, like I have to protect this because I want to feel good and I want my children and grandchildren to feel good. And that doesn't come from here, right? Like that comes from here. And
the cause and effect is so much more palpable when you're actually like standing there in the middle of a forest somehow.
Yeah, it really is. It's different. And the ideas that you're going to have and the perspectives that you're going to take are going to be different than if you have that same conversation in your office.
Do you see that?
Yeah. You're able to see broader. You're able to expand, right? And like if you just think about the confines of a space, if you're in a small space, like you're closed, you're contracting. If you're in a large open space where you can just see out, right? Like you're inspired. And I mean, even now with architecture, with design, when offices are being built and designed, they're trying to create more green spaces because they know that people will think differently, they will feel differently, their hormones in their body will be different. And so I think it's really important for people to understand this isn't just like a nice to have. This is something that you need for your biology and your psychology, and that the results will be fundamentally different than if you're just meeting in your office.
Amen. Believe that 100%.
Yeah.
And so if anyone who's watching this live has got any questions for Elina, by the way, feel free you can sort of send us a little message in the comment, which we can see. So if you want to do that, then please do. We talk a lot about sort of the future of teams rather than just sort of the future of work, and specifically how groups of people can get together. Beyond perhaps the use of sort of psychedelics, which I think is a very interesting, if for me, slightly scary prospect, because I don't know, very cautious.
I know, but I've always, I mean, Sally's going to kill me for saying this, but when she called her company WorkTripp with 2 Ps, I was just, I know it's not the intention, but for me, I'm just thinking like, we're going to have a work trip with
maybe one day. Sophie and I are like, how will you hold our hand? I'm not sure this is for us. But so beyond the use of that, which I do think is a very interesting space, and I will definitely be talking to you in the future about it as you sort of learn more, and I think there's a lot more research. What else do you think is exciting about the sort of future of teams and the way we work together going forwards? What can you see on the horizon?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that, you know, what comes up for me too is kind of generational differences. I think one of the things I hear a lot is, you know, there's like the millennials and the Gen Zs, they want to go out in nature. And somehow there's maybe like a stigma or an assumption that like the older generation wants it to be more traditional, kind of like the way the 9-to-5 work that we knew in the past. And I'm starting to see that there is a more and more conversation around some of the assumptions that we're making about like generational trends that we think separate people, and the assumptions that we make. But actually, like, people are all driven by the same needs. And when we start to explore why, what were the social constructs, what was the moment in time where people created their values and their belief system and their personal constructs, right? Like, did they live through COVID or did they live through World War II? Like, what is it that's driving their belief system? I think right now the environmental crisis is like really affecting everybody. Like like everyone understands this is happening.
Yeah.
And I think that relationship with nature is maybe driven more by younger people, but more and more so the kind of older generation is getting brought into the fold. So this is interesting, is like how, like sometimes I have clients who are like very senior and much older, and they're like, how do I manage my like Gen Z folks? And this, to me, like this going out in nature and connecting to our inherent humanity seems to be the way that you can do that, that you can find those bonds and reconnect and understand each other better and understand, like, because I used to be a lawyer, I'm very interested in conflict resolution as well. And a lot of conflict is just about kind of seeing the dignity in each other and understanding like where your fears or your concerns, your assumptions, your values, where they're coming from. And so I think that this is, again, like an opportunity to be able to leave the office, leave the construct, and say, like, who's on this team really, and what's important to each individual person, and what does that mean for the collective?
I love that. How beautifully put. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, we had we were doing a webinar a little while ago, and we were talking about the sort of mechanics of planning an offsite and the logistics and all the sort of things to think about, of which there are many. And I think something that comes up quite a lot is about an element of inclusivity and a concern that if we move out into nature and do this work, somehow that will be less inclusive. And, you know, my response to that has always been like, well, you don't have to go and climb a mountain, right? If you want to, and as a team, and that is a challenge that you want to take as a team, with all sorts of physical and mental abilities in your team, by the way. I've had some incredible stories of people who have gone to the top of mountains with all sorts of different levels of ability in their team. But you don't have to. There's something about just being in those environments, as you said, that can give you access to all of those things without it having to be something that's incredibly daunting for someone who is not used to perhaps being in a more rural environment.
You know, I'm always interested when we talk about what's inclusive and what's not, and like the change. What's the baseline? So why do we assume that the baseline of working in an office is normal, and that anything that deviates from that is to be questioned? Like, who decided that? The Industrial Revolution, right? Like when we were all kind of like in manufacturing.
Absolutely.
So I think to answer that question, again, it's about like zooming back and saying, I'd like to question the baseline of what's normal and what's inclusive, because I don't feel my best in an office environment. Like that doesn't feel inclusive for me, because that's a struggle. Like I feel uncomfortable when and I remember like working at a big bank and working at a big law firm. That's not where I thrive. So I always questioned, like, who decided that this is the baseline?
Yeah.
And so I think it's like coaching is more about questions than answers. Maybe it's like our cop out, right? But like, it's not about having the right answer. It's about asking the right questions. And so when you're being inclusive or not, that's for me the starting point of like, is your baseline inclusive?
Oh, such a great question to ask ourselves. I would love to close today by asking you if there are any books or podcasts or articles that you would. I know she's got loads. Just see if you can pick 2 or 3, Elina. I know this might be a challenge.
Because I'm such a bookworm. I'm such a bookworm. I'm like, what do I have here? Okay. Because I'm like, so I'm reading right now that I love, The Big Picture, which is a book on how psychedelics can help us make sense of the world. And I love this book because it's one of the only ones that I've found so far that really reflect my views, that it's not just about fixing PTSD and depression, that it's much more about like social impact. And then this is kind of that book just came out. This is an old book and I've decided to reread it, but it's The Athena Doctrine: How Women and the Men Who Think Like Them Will Rule the Future.
Oh, I love it.
And that's a book that I really love and I'm rereading because I talk a lot about the idea of feminine intelligence. And similar to the way that these authors talk about the feminine, it's not a gender construct. It's about that each one of us, regardless of our gender, has feminine and masculine qualities. And that because of the way that society has functioned, statistically, it's more often that women are associated with the feminine. But actually, that's not really fair to men. The men are also a victim of the patriarchy just as much as women. And so I think for all of us, regardless of gender, to be able to tap into that feminine principle and what does that mean for leadership and what is, what is our idea of what is the feminine? And it's that yin and yang kind of philosophy and the balance that we all need within each of us and how that actually translates to leadership. So those two are on my desk now, and I highly recommend them.
Great recommendations. And Elina, if people want to know more about you, where can they find you?
Yeah, best is just to go on my website, elinateboul.com, and you can also find me on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. And if you are not already following WorkTripp on LinkedIn, please do. And then you will be notified about all the other amazing guests that we speak to as this WorkTripp Introducing series goes on. Elina, thank you so much. It has been a joy as ever. And I really appreciate you taking the time today.
Thank you. And if people are interested on the whole nature and psychedelics kind of conversation, I'll be posting a LinkedIn article on that in the next couple of days. So you can find me there and sign up to my newsletter.
Wonderful. Can't wait. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
Bye.